Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this live panel discussion, Syndicating Investments in Nuclear Medicine. This live panel discussion is being hosted by the Technology Innovation Agency at its head office in Pretoria, South Africa, and is part of the ongoing BioAfrica Convention 2021. I am Vuyisile Phehane, the Executive Bioeconomy at TIA, and I will be facilitating this session. The objectives for today are threefold. Firstly, we'd like to craft a joint strategy by industry and funders for investment in nuclear medicine. Secondly, we'd like to establish a nuclear medicine investment task team that will approach several senior public and private sector officials to promote key investments in nuclear medicine. And thirdly, we'd like to pilot a nuclear medicine initiative that will deliver products to the market and that will make the case for greater investment in nuclear medicine. This industry-led session will hopefully start to define new investment approaches for innovation, growth, and sustainability of South Africa's nuclear medicine sector. We are joined by an esteemed panel of players in the nuclear medicine value chain, representing the end user, innovators, manufacturers, and funders. Professor Mike Sathekge is professor and head of the Department of Nuclear Medicine at the University of Pretoria and Steve Biko Academic Hospital. He is also CEO of the South African Nuclear Medicine Research Infrastructure, NUMERI. He has published over 200 articles and is a global leader in the treatment of prostate cancer. He also led and introduced several targeted molecular imaging and therapeutic probes in infection and oncology. To my immediate left is Dr. Jan-Rein Sievaart, who is an NRF-rated researcher and co-author of more than 50 international publications and more than 100 conference contributions, and is credited with 6 patents. He's the head of the radiochemistry group at NECSA, South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, and is currently the acting divisional executive for research and technology development at NECSA. To my far left is Thabo Tsilane, who is the acting group managing director for NTP Group Limited. He was previously group executive, technical and chief technology officer at NECSA, and is represented on a number of programs on the International Atomic Energy Agency. Tishanya Naidu is team lead for the Project Development Partnership, PDP Fund, at the PIC. This fund invests in early-stage investable opportunities in key and targeted economic sectors on behalf of the PIC. We have invited and are joined by the nuclear medicine research community, innovators, manufacturers, the venture capital community, private sector investors, and other DFIs, as well as the Director General of the New Development Bank, government, pharmaceutical companies, and medical insurance companies. To kick off, perhaps let's look at nuclear medicine from the perspective of the end user and get into the needs and experiences of the end user. Professor Sathekge, the end user, in essence people who are in this room, are the beneficiaries of nuclear medicine interventions. Can you take us through the role of nuclear medicine in disease detection and treatment, and perhaps take us through some of the challenges in demand, supply, and logistics? In essence, is nuclear medicine a nice to have, or is it a necessity? And what is the message you'd like to give to our medical insurance industry? Over to you, Professor.
Thanks, Chair Vayayu. If I could share my screen to actually explain myself in this regard. since it might be easier that way to actually elucidate what is being asked. And thanks for that important question. So I'm not so sure I can hear an echo. I'm not sure where it's coming from. But nonetheless, as you can see clearly, nuclear medicine, first of all, to explain it, it's that field of medicine that is going to revolutionize what we do and how things are happening. So you can see that it's a modality that would involve chemistry, engineering, and mechanisms that are really there as molecules that we need. And they can then be brought together to either bring us therapy or diagnosis. And we start this at a preclinical. We are saving that. We start by looking at what is happening at a preclinical level and test it there. And it's targeted to really go to a specific disease that we want to outline. For instance, many people might know inflammation of thyroid, but it's actually a disease detecting a mechanism looking at the physiology and function from brain to toe, from bones, heart, lungs, and then of course that is done, as I have said, by bringing various players together. And in that way, you really detect the diseases early, and therefore when you detect it early, you can treat them early. And when you treat them early, indeed, you really are sure that you will prevent the morbidity. And in that way, you actually save a lot of money, by the way, Chair, when you're doing that way. Just to show some of the other things, I will not necessarily go into the detail. For instance, tuberculosis has been with us for years, but we really continue not to manage it very well. We really continue to stumble over not the correct, you have 6 months of being treated with this disease, and some of it not optimal. So we are in a modality that actually try to see how can we be pathogen specific? How can we get microbials to really help with this? So pathogen specificity, we can do that, looking at the microenvironment. For everything, whether it's cancer or disease, it needs to be in a certain soil to be fertile. So we can look at what is the environment there that can make this tuberculosis not to grow, and that would help. Tuberculosis, for instance, is heterogeneous. People, you may see one lesion in the lung, but that lesion that is in the lung might not actually be the same as the other lesion that is in the left versus the right, or the knee, and vice versa. And how do you see early that this patient X will respond versus patient Y? And this is really excellent. So you can actually individualize your patient and treat them well. And some of the examples in cardiac diseases, for instance, sometimes we end up having with early and late stages of the cardiac manifestations. Sometimes we end up operating patients unnecessarily. So nuclear medicine is able to actually tell you, indeed, there is no need to operate this person. The muscle of the heart is completely dead, or you have to do something early before something is too late. I mean, these are some of the images that detect and show you the impacted areas that are dead and what you can do earlier on. And this is something that is really getting better and better. And of course, as we know with our lifestyle, that these are the things that we really are going to be needing to do all the time to really try and get it and get better. Importantly, as we image, of course, some of the other things in cancers, you can see very well that with cancers, this is what is important. And really, you can see indeed that, of course, this is an example of what conventional or older nuclear medicine or even CTs will tell you when you've got a prostate cancer to say, no, you are in a good space, don't worry, things are well. But if you look at what nuclear medicine shows, it shows you how extensive the disease is. Really, you can see you would have given this patient a false hope that he doesn't have metastatic disease, and you would have spent lots of money saying that this person must go to this and that. But to outline it well, then you can plan well your management and treat the patient well. And Chair, you can see we change management in around half of the patients that come to our space. Of course, we can see what we do for breast cancers, which is much more developing and a little bit slower than the prostate cancer part of it. But these are the things that we actually can do and that are important. In fact, Chair, to really say what is the thing, we have a lot of patients that are waiting for coming for prostate cancer imaging, for breast cancer imaging. Nuclear medicine needs to really grow so that we can actually bring this patient a bit earlier to treat them much better. We don't have a shortage of patients. In fact, we've got a shortage of HR as well as the equipment that can actually do that. But unfortunately, again, to emphasize, the patient, sometimes the funders do an error. Instead of funding a patient to get this type of a scanner, a PET scanner, I'll not go into the details of a PET scanner versus a gamma camera. They will fund a patient for a gamma camera procedure instead of a PET scanner, which will actually at the end, not augur well for the patient's morbidity and mortality. And of course, you are saving cents, but really in the end, you are losing pounds because you'll have the patient that are not well managed. just to show what we can do in the South African continent. We do actually dictate the pace of what has to happen. This is a classic example of what we have done, but now in this particular instance, taking a therapeutic molecule and tagging it to something that goes to the prostate again, we can see clearly that defining that the lesions that were seen before, the lesions are gone, and that is really excellent. In the interest of time, perhaps the other colleagues will come, but I'll come back to some of the questions maybe later. Another example of the impact of what we are doing globally as South Africa. You can see showing just a spectrum of 3 different involvement of prostate cancer patients. This one extensively involved in the lung, and we can see after our treatment with nuclear medicine, and again, the details, one will not necessarily go into those technicalities, but you can see that it's very clear after the treatment. And this one almost having 2 heads and a distended abdomen. And we can see the lesions before and after. This patient, excruciating pain, malignancy and cancer all over the bone, as we call a super scan after the treatment, and of course that is resolved and cleared. And this is what you need to do, and this is achievable in South Africa. And it's a question of time that this will be the mainstay of what we do. Yes, indeed, it is not a luxury. To your question, this is a need. I mean, if you're a male and you have prostate cancer, clearly you need to be imaged by nuclear medicine. And most of the time, chemotherapy works best in various diseases. It's an excellent modality, but in prostate cancer, in fact, not so much. Just to the second last scan, again, in terms of lighter things like the skin cancers that are there, we know South Africa is a sunny country. You can see without causing a pain or operating, we can actually see a basal squamous cell, basal cancer, squamous cell cancers that we treat. We just put a plastic foil and then we apply what comes from South Africa here, NTP Nexa, of course, we apply that rhenium here, and that patient's lesion are gone completely, no pain, nothing, just really paint it on. And then you can see again, many of the people that are really of darker skin, they tend to have keloids. If you operate on keloids, they come back and so on. So you can see again, clearly, we can manage those keloids without any doubt. And that's something that is revolutionizing things. A single session, painless, non-invasive, and you really relax. Chair, again, lastly, I want to say with the audience that we have here and gathered for us, to say that one is fortunate to be a panel chair for the review of research and development and innovation of peaceful uses of nuclear technologies in South Africa, which is convened by Academy of Science of South Africa, ASAP. That is something that involves obviously all the departments, be it science and technology, and of course, higher education, health, energy, looking at all aspects to say what will happen to those? How do we actually put what is needed for South Africa? What will help South Africa invest in various things that are go, and then directed by, of course, the SDG, the development goals that are there, directed by the national priorities that we have in our country. So people, if they do have some other ideas of what needs to be or what is ignored, other than only in nuclear medicine, then we actually need to, in fact, make sure that this is an opportunity that they shouldn't lose, and that's something that they can write to me, and Chair, you, people and colleagues can email us and continue to chat also via your office. Thank you so kindly.
Super. Thank you very much, Prof. So I think from the summary from your discussion is, of course, that the applications for nuclear medicine are quite vast. We have far many more patients than we have a supply of radiopharmaceuticals to treat these various cancers and so forth. And of course, what you're saying is that there is a need for us to engage more actively with the medical aid insurance, the industry, particularly for different programs and ways to assist the patients as they come in for interventions. Well, that said, Jan, this calls, in my view, for innovation. And in your view, I mean, as a representative of Nexa, what unmet needs are you addressing in the innovation space? We'd like to hear a bit more about your new innovations and technology development for that matter, and how we compare as South Africa to other global players. What needs to be done for us as a country to move into serious production for these interventions, as the Prof has suggested, we do not have enough of?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question as well as the opportunity here. Prof. Mike has set the scene very, very nicely. So for me to come in here, I will just be focusing on the Nexa perspective. And if we can just have a quick background on Nexa, our mandate is to undertake and promote research and development in the field of nuclear energy as well as radiation sciences. and make these generally available. And I think that's really an important part of our mandate. So over the years, Nexa has a very proud history of actually commercializing products. There are two subsidiaries that we created over the years. The one is NTP Radioisotopes and the other one Palchem. I'm briefly going to mention the isotopes on the left-hand side. These are products that were developed, commercialized. Some are still, the first two, Moly-99 and Iodine-131, are still in production. Other products come and go. On the right-hand side, these are more in the etching space, and I'm not going to dwell on to that. And my other colleague here will say a lot more about the NTP in the next talk. I think today's discussion is about investment. So here is an interesting investment. Quantum has been published internationally, and it compares. On the right-hand side, you have the conventional therapeutics, how much that costs and how long that takes, versus on the left, the diagnostic, which Mike has now quite clearly explained, versus then in the middle of the radiotherapeutic. So if we can just very quickly look at the bottom line, the last line is that, and these are in million euros internationally, 80 million for a diagnostic, 120 million for radiotherapeutic, 400 for a conventional therapeutic. So you see there's an easier route to market for conventional for these radiopharmaceutics as compared to the conventional treatment, and that makes us quite unique. And I think the imaging, as so nicely presented before, indicates exactly why we can move faster, because we actually see what is happening inside patients as we develop. So the next slide is giving you the value chain, and I've superimposed that on the one that's on the top, which is the one that's very familiar to everybody in the pharmaceutical space. And in this particular slide, I don't want to go too much into the monetary values. I think the important part is the TRL, the technology readiness levels, which is a universal barometer of where you are when you are developing a product from bench to bedside. So the basic research in radiolabeling is from TRL 1 to 3, then you go into preclinical GMP manufacturing, first in human studies, and then quite an elaborate phase 1 to 3 studies, which you can't avoid. It's still pharmaceuticals after all. So you may be asking what is in our pipeline. So again, at the bottom you have the TRL levels as well as the roadmap from product development. And I will get to that in an additional slide. There's the therapeutic that is in a pipeline called Glucap, and that will be earmarked for breast cancer. We've already seen the image on the bismuth 213 PSMA for prostate cancer, and on the lutetium PSMA, I'm not going to say much because NTP is already well advanced in manufacturing that and making that available locally as well as abroad. We also, just to show that we're not only oncology based, we're looking at infection imaging. There's some components that are interesting from a preclinical perspective for TB imaging. The one is on gallium UBI, and that actually we took that same molecule together with Steve Beaker, with Prof. Mike, into first in humans, and you can see that the infections clearly picked up by that. This is just illustrative purposes. So if we can go into specifics for two particular opportunities, the one is what we call a companion diagnostic. In this regard, the radio diagnostic agent would assist the oncologist in determining the exact and correct dose for the patient to receive. So this cartoon sort of on the top shows you the current treatment regime is successful from a clinical perspective, but not all patients are very happy during that process. So if you would try to empower oncologists and patients, you would like to have a scan and see how this platinum the active component in cisplatin, which is a very well-known chemo drug, how is that actually going into a specific patient? So we've done first-in-human studies again. There's been some prior funding by Nexa and TIA, and my colleague here from NTP they've already allocated some funding towards the next stage. And here you can see what the quantums are of the opportunities that are available. The first phase of phase 2 trial will be about algorithm development. One needs to understand how to calculate the dose then correctly for a particular patient. It's all about individualized patients, and that's, I think, where nuclear medicine plays in personalized medicine. And then later on, once we pass that, we will go into a pivotal trial, and you can see the quantums there. The second drug that we like to take all the way to the market is what we call glucap. It is an active and passive targeting component together, with, of course, the payload being a radioactive nuclide. And again, there's the opportunity for diagnostic and then therapy. In a little bit of detail, passive accumulation will be achieved by what we call the EPR effect, which is the enhanced retention, permutation and retention effect, where bigger molecules escape from ruptured vasculature. That's a key distinction in cancers and tumors, versus, and then followed up once it escapes from that vasculature in the right areas. It's then cleaved and provides an active targeting molecule that then is absorbed into the cells, and we can deliver smart bombs, as one can say, to the cancer cells directly. And as I mentioned, one would have an imaging opportunity, and then once you know exactly this patient is suitable for the treatment, we can follow up with the precise dose of treatment for that particular individual. So the investment opportunity here, there's already been $1 million spent so far, and we still need to go through preclinical GMP, first in humans, and then all the way to phase 3 trial. That was my slides. I hope that has covered your question. So I think in concluding, maybe in a concluding remark is just to say, we have in this country, we are very fortunate in the nuclear medicine space that we have world leaders from like the likes of Prof. Mike Sateche, that is doing this work in the clinical side, versus we have the inventors and the Nexa infrastructure that is capable of developing and taking products then through our subsidiary, and which you will hear about just now, all the way to the market, and they have already a global footprint. So I think from that perspective, the stage is very much set for moving rapidly along new innovations all the way to the market. I hope that is what you would be looking for.
Super. Thank you very much. So I think it's very clear that, in terms of our capability as a country, we are there.
Absolutely.
In fact, we're possibly global leaders as far as nuclear medicine is concerned. But I think what it also means is that, as we now develop our capacity, as we now are faced with the challenge of supplying these radiopharmaceuticals, we now turn to entities such as NTP to ask the question, where are we, as far as the ability for NTP to meet this demand for radiopharmaceuticals? Because we now understand that there will be production needs. There are and will be more production needs. Mm-hmm. But perhaps take us through NTP in terms of its own infrastructure to be able to meet that production demand for the country. And tell us a bit about what it costs an investor to make serious investment into the kinds of infrastructure that's required to produce these radiopharmaceuticals. As we've heard all morning, we cannot do without. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Chair. And I'm quite excited to speak after Prof. Mike Sateche and Dr. John Rein-Zivat, because they laid an excellent foundation. Now we know that nuclear medicine is not a luxury. If it was, according to us, we could be saying it should be readily available. but we're getting there slowly. I'm from NTP Radioisotopes, and I'm the interim MD. NTP, just at high level, is a subsidiary of NEXA, which means we are also part of being a state-owned entity. At a very high level, I'll take you through a few things. One, what is NTP? And what products are we offering, and the value chain that we are, what is the size of the market, and the question that you're asking, can we meet the demand? What are the opportunities? I saw PIC is there. They want to lash into the opportunities that are there. Two have been highlighted already, Blue Cap and Cisplatin, but I will take you through the breakdown of where they can put their money so that we can advance this noble cause. NTP Radioisotopes, I can say proudly, we have touched our vision a little bit. We are counted as the leading producers and supplier of quality products, and emphasis in quality products because they are highly regulated. Because we took the baton from NEXA, NEXA said, can you make them readily available, generally available? And we are doing exactly that, and that's why I'm saying we are counted as the leading, and I can proudly say we've touched our vision a little bit. But who is NTP? The parent company is an advanced manufacturer of APIs. APIs is the active pharmaceutical ingredients that I'll talk more about it. But we've got a very reliable transporter called NTP Logistics, which we own 51%. It's shipping moly all over the world. I'll show you the footprint. Where you see the South African flag in my next slide will mean that that's where NTP is flying the South African flag. But we've also having a subsidiary called AC Amashem. We owning it 100%. It's also a distributor of these products, medical and biological products. And we've got one or two others that are not directly related to what we are doing. They're in the industrial isotopes, and the other one is in the irradiation, especially when I'd like to make an example of honey. The irradiated honey that people see is irradiated at NTP in one of its subsidiaries called Gamwave. These are the facilities that make it happen. And it starts with our noble and very, very much loved reactor called Safari. She's aging gracefully with and well-maintained at around 55 years. From Safari, the target are sent to one of our production cells in the radiochemicals on the bottom left. And at the top there, that's where the FDGs are made from the cyclotron facilities. And I spoke a little bit about AC Amashem, that's our radiopharmacy, which, of course, I will indicate the size of investment needed there that will take us to be among the leading radiopharmacies in the world. These are the product offering from NTP, starting with our own Novatech, a generator that is manufactured locally by us. And next, you'll see Moly. Moly is our current blockbuster. You will see about 89% of our revenue is generated from Moly. The jury is out and say, can we get another blockbuster? And we are looking for investors, we are looking for partners so that we can go on this route together to look for the next big blockbuster like Moly. If you look below, we've got the diagnostics and the therapeutics, iodine and lutetium. And lutetium is the new kid on the block, especially on the therapeutics. It's starting to gain entry and is going to, as Professor Satek have said, to revolutionize this nuclear medicine should it be supported accordingly. At the bottom there, potential diversification of products. That's where I'm looking at the likes of PAC, IDC, investors to come in and say, let's partner together so that we can grow this nuclear medicine together. If you see a South African flag in that, it's where NTP has touched. So the footprint is there. The only thing is just to answer the question that you have just raised, can we meet global demand? And we can see we're already there, but what is the market looking like? And can we really make sure that where there is a demand, we are able to supply? And proudly, I will say that we want to grow this revenue. You're sitting at 1.2. Every year, we're revising this. And because of the current restrictions, we thought we'd have surpassed 1.5 on our way to 2 billion. But there are a few things that still need to be there and done. And one of them is the investors that I'm talking about, that let's stick together, let's partner, let's collaborate so that we can grow this pie together for the benefit of South Africa. If you look at 89%, that's API, And when I said API, one of our active pharmaceutical ingredients that we are proud of, we got it from R&D, and they said, can you go and make this generally available? And we did. So we are one of the few large-scale model producers in the world, reliable, trusted, and quality product that come from us. And the pie, like I've indicated, 89% of 1.2 billion is attributed to moly and technetium, as they normally link the two. The only thing that we are saying here is that can we move from 1.2 to 2 billion? And that's the question that you ask, because you don't want to only move in terms of demand, but also the revenue must demonstrate that we are growing. These are the role players. On the left, I think that's the Spain just Dr. Jan Rein-Zivert is playing. And the extreme right, Prof. Mike Satek is spending most of his time there at the nuclear medicine centers, where the imaging cameras, very expensive cameras are there, but they need our product so that they can make it happen. We are playing in the APIs manufacturer. We are a very advanced manufacturer. We know our business, proud to say that. And at the top there, we are trying to repackage our radiopharmacy so that it can also be of international standard. We are also in partnership in the sales and distribution with multinationals so that we can able to reach other parts of the country where we cannot reach. But how is this market looking like? The nuclear medicine market, currently is estimated at about 5.9 billion USD. The projections are saying by 2030 we might touch down to 30 billion. And that's where a growth is required, because the growth rate at the moment is about 16% per year. How is it structured? 80% is on the diagnostic side, and 20% is on the therapeutic side. But we are saying because of the introduction of lutetium-177, we are going to see a steady rise, especially on the therapeutics, estimated to be 70% by 2030. We want to play in that space also. And we are saying, come, let's play together in this space. And I know investors are opening their checkbooks as we're moving closer to the figures so that they can take advantage of the situation. The diagnostic market, which has grown by about 6% per year, it is expected that from 2021, 2023, 2024, it will start growing such that by 2030, it would have grown by about 43%. But in all this growth that we're talking about, moly and by extension technetium will still remain the cheapest radionuclide for the next 20 years. That's an estimation. And we are saying there's still even scope of increasing the current capacity so that we can meet the global demand. That's the picture that I've just indicated. The first graph, which is a little bit gray at the top, indicates the global nuclear medicine. And if you start looking from 2023, 2025, that we start seeing a very sharp increase. And that is mainly propelled by the radiotherapeutics, because they're starting to grow a little bit up. But you can see on the diagnosis that is growing at that 6% per year. So the growth, the next growth, will be in the therapeutics rather than the diagnostic. And we're hoping we're going to move in that path together with the investors that I'm trying to talk to today. We've developed a little bit of a commercialization framework, and we take it from well-established practices that says these are the stages of development of your product. But we indicate that at the beginning, especially when at lead optimization, 2 to 5 million, NTP has been actively saying, perhaps this is the space where we can put our money. Before we call on any other person, let us put our money where our mouth is. And we've been doing that with our R&D, but also we've been looking at some other incentives that are there, because it's a little bit 5 million. But if you go to the next stage, that's when we start to look outside and say, can we partner, can we collaborate with the various funders? Your IDC, your PIC, your DTI have been coming in handy to assist us with that. And of course, as we move towards the clinical development phases, that's when a lot of funding is required, and we are prepared to look at any type of funding, debt, equity, so that we can advance this course. The two types of products that are currently paraded today, and I'm taking from my colleague Jan Rein, have indicated that on the diagnosis side, we're still having our cisplatin, and we are saying, very viable project. You can see an IRR of 23%, 248 million NPV, and we are saying, can we partner together so that we can take this product to the next necessary developmental stage? So we'll have some engagement with various investors to make sure that they understand where we are, but mainly we latch onto this cisplatin product so that we can contribute to the diagnostic part as we've indicated. The second one, which is our blue cap, also a very sizable investment is required, especially at the last stages. Currently an IRR of 18%, and we are saying the funding requirement, especially for the last 3 phases, will be quite substantial. As usual, we're putting our money on the first phases because if we don't believe in it, nobody will. So we put our money, and then once it starts to develop and gain momentum, we're opening up for the other investors because it's starting to be true and possible that it can be achieved. That's on a high level where we are with regard to those 2 products, but we can talk more about it. There are 2 key things on the infrastructure that we are having. Currently, we are producing moly, and we've asked the question, can we meet the global demand? Yes, and we are moving forward to make sure that we operate at full production, at full installed capacity. We are looking at building new cells, so we are open for investors currently where we're speaking, so that we can latch on an existing product to manufacture, to scale up our manufacturing capabilities. But also we've got a radiopharmacy that we are saying we need to scale up to repackage such that it can serve a bigger market, and there is an investment of 250 million required for that purpose. So 2 key issues that we want, immediate and long term. The long term is the blue cap and the cisplatin, but currently as we speak, we need some investors to our radiopharmacy. We'll look our investors to grow our current capacity. Thank you, Chair.
Super. Thank you very much. I think it's very clear from what you've explained to us that we do have the capacity, we do have the skills, and of course, you know, when you look at examples such as cisplatin, which is in essence the beneficiation of platinum, it really means that we can now start looking at opportunities to get engaged with our mining industry, particularly the platinum mines, for their contribution towards, you know, the health of the population of the country and of course the continent. But Prof, before we get into the sort of, you know, future investments, we'll come to you, Tish, just now. Perhaps take us through, you know, Numeri, what Numeri is all about. We do understand and like to acknowledge the investment by the Department of Science and Innovation and contribution of about 450 million rands into entities such as Numeri. We'd really like to hear about that because, you know, we can never speak about the entire value chain without speaking about, you know, investments made by our own government as far as nuclear medicine is concerned.
Yeah, again, thanks. And of course, this lends itself well from what, of course, Prof. Ziervat and Mr. Tilane have already said, respectively. So you can see clearly that the Numeri, actually what it stands for is Nuclear Medicine Research Infrastructure. This is part of the DSI for saying that, you know, they wanted South Africa to have South African Research Infrastructure Roadmap. SARIR. So Department of Science and Innovation said, let's invest money in here. The reason is that we want to develop research on our own. We don't want to have a situation wherein we are really going to be parasites and really just taking things from outside. But let us produce things from outside, from here, and then taking them outside. So for nuclear medicine research infrastructure, therefore, it's for clinical research and development. This has got various sectors, but the main side will have 2 cyclotrons, a GMP radiopharmaceutical, so that whatever we produce can be sold and can be taken elsewhere, and a state-of-the-art preclinical and clinical imaging. We have that already, but we're going to have even better. The preclinical facility as we speak, it's there by a NEX and NTP, and it's there and it's already operational. The clinical part of it is already here, but we're going to build even a bigger structure, which is a three floor story. This will then help to also address the critical scale skill that we need. It will also make our collaborations even much more better. And therefore the investors will be happy to know that whatever they're investing in, the QC is very good and the science is excellent. So it will be innovation leaders and will discover even more things. And of course, with that, of course, we have to bear in mind that if it's a national infrastructure, which it is, University of Pretoria, Steve Biko, and NEXA and Department of Science and Innovation will have to govern that, and that is what is governed. And then we are sitting here, of course, one is having the fortune of heading it. As I have said, it's still a lot of money that is invested by government, and that should help the investors to see that if government has already invested 250 million, and specifically here at Steve Biko 300, that's a lot of money, and that's something investors to see that there are opportunities. This will, of course, make sure that the workforce, as I said, is really produced. And then regulatory issues. Nuclear medicine also has got a problem of the South African health regulatory associated products are really not really well taken care of, in a sense that the industry sees nuclear medicine as small, and therefore to invest the full force might be a real hurdle. So in that way, NUMERA will also try and help with those regulatory critical access. The lucrative that was spoken about, the cisplatin that was spoken about, NUMERA will also be doing a comprehensive work of making sure that these kind of things are registered easily with SAPRA. And then, of course, the research must be appropriate to the country, and it will help with the reinvestment like we have asked earlier on. And then in that way, that's why we need the partnership and advocacy that is critical. So this is the structure of what it is like for those that might not be assistive, big academic, and this is what it is, 3 levels, the preclinical, GMP, and GMP lab, and of the clinical side. We will, of course, as Mr. Tilan has said, we are going to look at therapy as the primary thing. We are already doing it, but it will be at a higher level. Newer probes for cancer, for cardiac, and for infection imaging. But of course, we must also influence curricula of what is being taught. And to do that, there will be five sectors that we are looking at. We have the preclinical facility, as Jan Rein is looking at already, and then we have the basic and translational research that must look at the molecules interacting with your other science that are not in nuclear medicine, the in vitro and in vivo way of looking at things, and the engineers that we might want to look at, and then bringing it to the fore, and then we see how we can label that. And then, of course, the clinical facility, which is the main one, and then the infection imaging, which is in Cape Town, looking at things like TB and other infections. And then, of course, the GMC, the GMP laboratory, which is excellent. So, you know, we've got a full arsenal of the whole cascade of what needs to happen. This is some of the examples of what the BTR will be looking at COVID, looking at prostate, various aspects that we are already looking at. These are some of the equipment that we are having already as NUMERA that are housed at NEXA. You can see not only speaking theory, you can see this is where we house our animals. These are all the small scanners that are existing, and they will be brought into the entire building, which will be completed in the near future. And you can see we can do things like autoradiography, and we do have a BSL-3 laboratory. There are a lot of products that we are looking at. One will not go into their names, but it ranges from, of course, neuroimaging, things like dementia, which is going to be a problem. We will be looking at those things. Oncology, which is a lot of work to do at. And then, of course, as Africa, infectious diseases. This is what NUMERA will do. At the moment, there are several universities who are working with both local and international. The preclinical facility has got 26 projects, the BTR 19 project, and several projects that are really happening with several publications already. And we do already have some accreditations from various sectors that are there. This is some of the human scanner that is there. And then just to end, NUMERA will make sure that indeed this technology in nuclear medicine as it is going to be affordable, it's going to be available, it's going to be accessible and appropriate to our country and scientists.
Super. Thank you very much, Prof. So Tish, having heard, the panelists in essence making the case for nuclear medicine in South Africa, of course, none of this, is possible without historical investment. And again, we'd like to acknowledge the contributions by many others, including the Department of Science and Innovation. But coming from the PIC and your contribution and participation in the national system of innovation, what do you think are the models that need to be put in place to make these kinds of sectors attractive to the PIC to invest in? And what kind of funding partners should we be thinking about, Perhaps we can be guided by yourself just in terms of what would an investor be looking for to part with their hard-earned cash. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think, from a broader PIC point of view, we do participate in, the later stages of investment. And, typically, from a PDP fund point of view, which is PIC's earlier stage fund, we participate from TRL 7 to 9. And then, north of that, we kind of have our bigger unlisted funds. That's, our private equity fund and our Isibaya fund, which is typically an impact fund. But I think the important part there, and I'd like to emphasize, is that all of these unlisted funds that PIC has are impact funds. And that aligns very well with the intent behind nuclear medicine investments, right? Because while we measure financial return, we measure social impact alongside that, and that really gears impact funding well towards nuclear medicine, or gears nuclear medicine well towards impact funding, should I rather say. So while we invest more on the end part of development and stuff like that, we do come with the bigger ticket sizes, which are able to get these opportunities into a commercialization state, or into a state where they are able to supply the global market. And I think that's the role PIC looks to play. But in specific, the PDP fund acts as a knowledge aggregator in the early stage space. And what that typically means is that the PDP fund is able to leverage the PIC's global network that sits around it for the early stage space. And part of that network, it's philanthropic funders. There are global funders who actually have Africa allocations, but are actually looking for more specific opportunities within the Africa space and just don't know how to enter. So they'll use, one of their trusted partners like PIC or the PDP fund to enter into those spaces. So that's really what PIC brings. And specifically around the knowledge aggregation with PDP, the fund typically explores new areas of investment for the PIC, and spearheads investment into new industries for the PIC. So we kind of look at deals on a broad basis and see if we can crowd in funding if we aren't able to fund as PIC, but what readies those opportunities for funding from our bigger funds that will take them into full commercialization and able to scale globally. So that's broadly what the PIC offers. And the PDP fund in particular has identified pockets of excellence in terms of business development. And so the PDP fund in particular brings a non-financial aspect to development of these opportunities, as well as a financial aspect, because we do have smaller ticket sizes than I think what is imagined, in our bigger funds at the PIC. But the non-financial aspect is very important in very technical environments, right? Because you typically have very technical people leading these deals, and you do need the business overlay coming along with it, and that really takes opportunities into the global market very well. So I think that's broadly that's what PIC offers. I think another thing that I've recently learned that PIC I think gears opportunities well from the PIC process is our due diligence process, because our due diligence is very, and I'm sure it's well known, but it's very, very intricate and detailed. And we run what is known as an ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance due diligence, a legal due diligence, and a risk due diligence, as well as a technical due diligence. And that DD process is very intricate, right? So it makes it, once we've completed the due diligence and we have interest in investing, that makes it those opportunities viable for other funders who take comfort in PIC's due diligence process and the thoroughness of that. So I think PIC's investment comes with a very thorough due diligence, and therefore makes these opportunities very accessible from the global market and global funding space. So yeah, broadly, that's what I think PIC definitely brings in terms of investment and what they can offer the national innovation space. So I think from in terms of models and so forth that you could deploy into these opportunities, I think it becomes very opportunity specific, right? It speaks to the level that first of all, the ticket size that is required by the opportunity, and also the level of development the opportunity is at, what kind of support does the opportunity, the non-financial aspects, what type of support does it need, would a blend, what would their blended financing stack look like? And so those are all considerations we look at in structuring the deal. If it requires syndication because we aren't able to meet the full ticket size, we are able to engage partners and networks around the PIC for those syndication purposes. So yes, I think that the models are very opportunity specific, and the structures around that are very opportunity specific. But with the malleability of those models, we're able to get to the bigger ticket sizes and be able to fund into the global market very well and compete on a global scale in terms of funding. Then I think it was your last question, but around the funders that should be engaged. I think in the early stage, from my colleague from NTP's presentation, it's very clear that there's a lot of grant funding into the space. And I think there's a lot of participation from a research point of view, but there's not really participation in a commercialization point of view. And I think that's where institutions such as IDC, DBSA, PIC, the private market, global impact investors, even philanthropic funders, right, could really play a very important role, where you could get the company into a good blended finance stack and be able to take that into the global market. So yeah, that's my take on that.
And the rest of our listeners. Thank you very much, Tish. What this means is really that, even as a sector, it's very important that we understand who's who as far as sector is concerned, who the different players are, and what role everybody plays just in terms of the particular value chain. Certain organizations such as ourselves, the Technology Innovation Agency, our role is really as a facilitator of these kinds of relationships. We do make investments, absolutely, but because of our limited funding, it makes sense for us to go out and seek some of these partners such as the PIC, who in essence come in with the follow-on funding, provided, of course, their requirements for funding are met, as would, the tiers requirements for funding, they would need to be met as well. But what this also means, colleagues, is that, going forward, it's very important that we're able to harness, in essence, what we have within the country, both in terms of expertise, the opportunity, infrastructure, and basically present a case for investment by entities such as the PIC. And this brings us to the final part of our discussion, really around how we syndicate, how we bring all of this together. And what we're saying is that, as we look at the opportunities, in summary, as we look at the opportunities, as we look at what we have around the table, it's really for us to look at, in terms of impact, where are we playing in the country? So the DSI and the government and so forth have got certain models and certain thought leadership just around the district development model, how we ensure that, what we do as a country is actually distributed and experienced, as far as in the far corners of the country. And so we look, Professor, at, the opportunities that are presented by yourselves in the nuclear medicine sector, with opportunities such as going into Mpumalanga and so forth. I mean, this becomes, in essence, a short to medium-term target, where we're looking at new facilities in areas where we need, and the need has been identified for nuclear medicine. Can you perhaps talk us about that? And I'm really opening up the floor to the colleagues just to talk. Of course, we've heard about candidates such as cisplatin and glucab, but perhaps there might be other candidates in prostate cancer, infection imaging isotopes, particularly tuberculosis, and perhaps some of our inventions and thinking around breast cancer imaging. Ultimately, we want to be creating the space for new isotopes to come to the market, and whether this might be terbium isotopes and so forth, but really for us to talk about how we make nuclear medicine available to as many of our population as possible, and not only for the privileged few who can afford it through medical aids and so forth, and perhaps start having those discussions with medical aid companies to say, how do we make this intervention available? Prof, perhaps if I can just hand over to you with your parting comments as we end this particular session, just in terms of where nuclear medicine is going as a discipline, and perhaps to all the colleagues and all the panelists, just to give us your parting shots in terms of the syndication for investment into nuclear medicine.
Chair, thank you so kindly for that. And really, that's a really great opportunity that you are opening up for us. Indeed, we definitely have to really open up nuclear medicine to other hospitals. We cannot leave it only for places such as university hospitals. As you'd imagine now, for instance, it's available in University of Pretoria, Steve Biko Academic Hospital. Somebody would have to travel from Nelspruit, for instance, sometimes for a 31-hour session procedure. And that's really unfair for those people and their family and their loved ones to really, whilst they could have a procedure being there, to be done there. And then of course, also we have to really bear in mind that for people to actually utilize things well, they have to see it and they have to be familiar with it. So once you take it out of the university hospital and it's also in the so-called secondary hospitals, then it will also be part and parcel of the teaching curricula of the undergraduate. As you train to be a doctor, nuclear medicine is not necessarily part of what makes you really a doctor. So at least if you can have serious and well-structured introduction courses of nuclear medicine, then people will be confident to utilize it. And people will also think of their research question in their disciplines that they are unable to answer, and then they will think about, but nuclear medicine operates in this fashion. Therefore, I can collaborate and work with them in terms of my work, of what I do. And that will actually make a transdisciplinary measure. Yes, it's inevitable that it's going to go that way, but it's taking a long time unless investors help us to really grow it out. And that will also help the funders to also come to the party. And it will also help to make sure that government also make some of the procedures to be under the minimum prescribed benefits, meaning it's mandatory, paid for, and therefore government will also put it on the budgets for the hospitals in that way. Yes, this is exciting. Nuclear medicine is certainly revolutionizing medicine as we know it today.
Super. Dr. Zivot, your parting comments, and you too, Mr. Telana, your parting comments.
Yeah, thanks, and I would concur fully that moving the nuclear medicine not only to tertiary hospitals but to secondary hospitals would be a great step forward. From our perspective, from a disciplinary perspective, that the underpinning discipline here is radiopharmacy.
Sure.
And unfortunately, radiopharmacy is no longer part of the pharmacy curriculums in most of the universities. And I think one of these things that we're looking forward to is that to put that back there so that a pharmacist is not completely unknown and unfamiliar to this territory. And it's part of the demystifying of nuclear that we, especially as one of the things that Nexa we should and are doing, and I hope that the colleagues have, and everyone that's watching has seen how powerful nuclear medicine actually can be.
Sure.
And I think with that I would conclude.
Super, thank you very much. Thabo, very briefly, in the few seconds we have, and then over to you, Tish, for your parting comments as a funder.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, TIA, for the opportunity and the platform to showcase what we are and what we are capable of. I can assure you that we have taken our mandate very seriously to generally make nuclear medicine available. And we need partners and investors to grow this because we've got the capability, we've got the skills, we've got the expertise to play in that space. The only thing that we are saying is that can we grow together? Because you know, if you're not growing, it means you are dying. We don't have a choice. We just have to grow this by partnering with suitable investors to make it happen.
Great stuff. Tish, your parting comments before we end this session.
Very much, Tia, for organizing this session. It's been very informative from my point of view. But yeah, so I guess my parting thoughts are it's very interesting to see the amount of pipeline that would be available to funders such as PIC. And I'm very excited to engage in some of the opportunities they have mentioned. And these sessions are always very informative, right? Because as an investor, you sit so far removed from the technical aspects of deals, or at least the technical opportunities that are out there that we just don't understand. And we need partners such as TIA who can, translate between the finance world and the scientific world, and it's such an important part of what we do. So yes, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you very much to our viewers. Thank you very much to Buy Africa, and mostly thank you very much to the Technology Invention Agency for making this possible. We'd like to bring this session to an end, syndicating investment in a nuclear medicine. Thank you very much.